In this video, we're going to take a look at the LightNap Scaffolder. This is a utility that helps you take a single .NET Entity class on the server and spread it out to give you end-to-end database to user experience infrastructure and code. So let's get started. Now I'm on the repo page here, and the reason I'm starting here is to go over to the documentation page. And inside here we've got common scenarios, and there's two things we're going to look at here. The first one is adding entities. So we're going to create an entity, and I'm going to follow mostly the process we have here. And then we're going to do some scaffolding from an entity. And then this is the process that kind of explains it a bit. We'll go into a bit more detail, but if you want to get some of the text around this, the documentation site is the best place to go. So I'm going to start off here, and I'm actually just going to copy this entity here. This is a test entity. It could be anything, but we'll go into the server side code here. And you generally want to put your entities inside the LightNap core project, and we would want to put it in the data folder inside entities. So I'm going to go ahead and do a new item. We'll call it test entity. And then I'm going to just replace the code that's here with the code from the server. And we've got this one here set up like that. I'm actually going to make this required. Why not? And the scaffolder it'll be able to differentiate between required and optional fields. So this is a very simple entity, right? There's an ID for it. Entity framework will recognize that as being the unique identifier. Oh, we've got a name string, we've got a quantity and a price. So this is like a product mock-up here. Now I've created this thing. The only other thing I need to do is to go into my DB context, and presumably what I would do is I would set up another DB set. So I would do a public DB set. Almost. So we'll do a DB set of test entities. There we go. And why not? So now we've got this set up, so Entity Framework's aware of it. I don't want to work with the migrations just yet, so I'm going to go into my Web API project, and I'm going to change my development here to use the in-memory provider, just because, you know, as a practice, I like to work with the data model and kind of iron it out using in-memory, and then switch over to do the framework stuff there. So now I've got this, I'm going to do a quick build of the project, just a sanity check to make sure everything works as expected here. And the build should succeed as I would hope it would do. And now we're going to go ahead and we're going to run the scaffolder. So I'm going to switch over into my instance of VS Code here. And so we're in the source folder. So what I have here is I've got this scaffolding folder. And let me jump back out to the repo for a second to give you an idea what that looks like. So inside the source folder, we've got our main project, and there's the scaffolding folder. This includes in it a scaffolding project and then some tests. The scaffolding project is something that's designed to be run with some command line parameters that we'll have documented better. And this enables you to run it and be able to take an entity that it points at in the core project and then build out the infrastructure from end to end. So at this time, it is a standalone console app that runs, but we do plan to package it up to make it available for people to use probably as a .NET extension, like the EF tools. But for now, we're going to just build it from the command line just to make sure everything's restored, everything built's fine. And then we're going to go right into the path. It's easier to run it from the source folder. And what it is just the path to the executable there, and then the name of the executable that we want to be able to model. In this case, it's test entity. So it's going to look at that. Well, really fast. It built the project. So it did an analysis of it. It figured out, all right, here are the fields. We've got ID, name, quantity. The backend, it's going to create it as int string, int double. Fine. Front end, number, string, number. That's fair. It required false, true, false. Yeah, so remember we made name required. Nullable is false, true, true. I'm actually going to go ahead, though. I want to change something on this server, though, because I realize we're not using some of the cooler things. So we'll make, for example, we'll say a public date, time, date. Right? Just, I like the fact that, we'll do that backwards. That's a typo on my part, but it still works. And then I'm going to run the entity tool again. And this way, hopefully it'll see that. It already sees that this is, the entity already exists because I did not tell it to overwrite. So I will tell it to do that. And so it'll go ahead and it'll overwrite these. And as you can see, by default, it doesn't really like to overwrite stuff. And I might as well just run this as well here to give you an idea for the help, just so you can get a look at this. So if the only real thing it requires is class name there, but you could override it with some options. For example, if you have a different path to source, this is the source folder of the repo. if you have a different namespace for your project. And these things it's all designed where out of the box it'll work as is with the project structure and everything else running from the source folder. You just punch it in the way we did it, and it'll just give you the code you want. The only other thing of interest here is the skip components. This one is probably the most interesting one because skip components will skip the process of generating the Angular components. And the reason that's in there is so that if you're changing the data model on the back end, but you've already done work on the front end, you don't want to overwrite that work necessarily. So anyway, so this ran, it was successful. And then as you can see, if we scroll up here, we can see all the code that was generated, right? All these files. So then let's go take a look at how that code got generated, because this all follows the same patterns and practices that we put in place for the rest of LightNap. So first things first, there's a test entities folder now that has DTOs for 4 specific things. The first one is a generic DTO that represents the response object that'll be returned when you request the test entities. So that's your ID, name, quantity, price, date. Nothing too out of the ordinary there. We've also got a create test entity. This is the one that's sent up over the wire to the REST API for creating one. It has all that stuff, except it doesn't have the ID, because the ID is expected to be generated because it's an int. It's assumed the server will figure out how to create that. Similar for update. Now, in the case of update, maybe you don't want the date to be included in here, in which case you'd go through and you'd remove the date references from the different parts of your code. And then finally, the search test entity gives you some basic ability to search by any of those fields. And these are just exact searches at this time. It doesn't do any kind of special thing. And they're also all optional. So you can call it and just provide a name, or just provide price, or provide a quantity and a date, or whatever combination of things you have by default. And this is all done, the main place where the work for this is done is going to be in the test entity service that gets generated. Now the test entity service has the main CRUD operations. It has a get, it has a search as well. It has create, update, and delete. And these are just doing the basic patterns that we have throughout the project, where it's going in, grabbing the item if it's updating it or deleting it, trying to do the process for it, and then returning back to you an appropriate thing. Search is simple. It grabs it expects that test entity's DB set to be on the application DB context that we created. If you don't do that, I mean, if you don't have that there for some reason, this code it'll give you an error. I mean, all this code will, because it's assuming you're using the backed DB thing there. And this scaffolder is very specifically for this LightNap project. So it goes a lot further than a generic scaffolder could, but it also can't really be used anywhere else. So just to set that expectation out of the gate. And things like, for example, the name search is an exact string match for the name. You'd probably want to update that with your code, but the idea is this at least gives you somewhere to start with. And then it also has this interface, which is just the front end for that test entity, so that we can abstract that away. There's no test at this time, but you could add those in if you wanted to. And then extension methods that exist on the DTO and on the entity object, so you can go back and forth between them as cleanly as possible. So that's all the work that's done there for test entities. Now on this web API, we've got a controller here that was added for the test entities controller. And like before, it has those endpoints you'd have, very thin requests to go through to make those basically to make those responses to the requests pass through to the lower service layer, and then the response is sent back up. The only thing is there's one extra step here, which is we have to register the dependency here. So we have to tell it, since this thing is expecting an interface of this kind, we need to tell the service that it's mapping to that, which we go into the add application services method inside our extensions class. So we come into the extensions folder, we find application services extensions, add application services is the first thing, paste it in here, and then now we have that code up and running and ready to go. And I'm going to go ahead and tell it to debug start, at which point it'll launch the Swagger UI so we can even look at it and see how it works. And we'll probably skip working with it directly here, but you can see when we get into test entities, we've got all these things, right? And it even gives you just everything you'd expect to see from this. It's all wired up so that it's ready to go. So we'll hide this for now. Now let's go see what it did for us in the Angular project. So inside the app folder where all the code goes, we now have a test entities folder. And like the server, we have models that map one-to-one to all the server-side stuff. And again, if you make changes in the server, you'll have to reflect them on the client. But if you don't, then this just works. We also have services in here. The first one is a data service. That's kind of a private service that lives here. And this one knows to connect up to the API URL root test entities that matches our REST API with those endpoints. and then a more accessible test entity service, which is just a thin call into the data to the data layer. If you want to do caching, you want to do validation, any kind of extra work for processing it as we go, you would do that here. It also gives us another important thing here is you'll notice every time we get a DTO back, whether it's on the get or the search, we're calling this rehydrate method. This is a helper method that's generated as well that goes through and says, hey, I noticed you have a date here. If that date's not null, then let me go ahead and rehydrate that as a date object. So something that you can use on the client a little more cleanly. So we've got that, we've got our services covered, our models, our helpers, and then finally components. Now the components here, we've got an index page, which is like a search landing page that gives us a table with some searchability. And then this is wired up in the back it just has some code that's kind of like boilerplate code for working with a PrimeNG table. We've got a get, we've got an edit, and we've got a create, and we'll demo those in a second. There is one extra step we have to do here is because although this area was created, it's not wired up into the UI at this time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in here, and you'll see here it says, hey, you have to go into the app routing routes file and add a couple things. So this first one is just going to bring in routes as test entity routes inside the routing. And this is a little bit unique in the way that we work here in LightNap, which you probably get familiar with once you got a chance to see the code a bit, but we paste that in there. And then we'll go back to the file we were in, which was this routes here. And then we need to add the path to all these somewhere else. And what we'll do is we'll put it in, specifically I'm putting it in here because this will require that the user is logged in to be able to access it. This is just a demo preference. I mean, you can put it wherever you want. And you can also split up the things that are in here. So if we go back and take a closer look at the routes that we created, what we're doing is we're saying at the root of the path that goes to, do our index component, have a /create, that'll go to the create component. A /ID will be the get, /ID/edit will be edit. So pretty much expected stuff there. Now I'm going to change into that LightNap folder here, and I'm going to say start. So we'll give this a second to load up. Should be relatively quick. And now this is up and running on 4200. So I'm going to just hit F5 so I can run in my debug mode. So here we go. The app is up and running. And now if I try to go to test entities, what this will do for us is this will ask us to log in. I'm going to log in as the administrator user that was generated for us. This is just to make it easier. So they're logged in, and now I'm at test entities. I've got this page. There are no items to show at this time. Let's go ahead and create one. We get default values for those different fields. I'm not going to change any stuff for now, but I created it. We can go in and edit it, say name, give an exclamation point, make it 1, make these all 2s, save it. Now we've got the item that was saved. I can go back and take a look at the item. We can go up to the top page, see this. If I wanted to filter it, let me go ahead and create a few more of these. I'm going to just go back and forth and just use the back button to create a few of these. So these are all being created. Go to see all. Got these. Now I can filter down and say, for example, I just want to expand this quantity of 1. Give it a second to catch up. We do a little debounce there, maybe 0, right? And you can see we've got all this stuff here. And then we go and view one of these, edit this guy. This was the ID number 3. We're going to delete it. We'll confirm that it was deleted. We're back on the search page. 3 is gone. All that stuff all the way through was done for us. We didn't really have to write any code. We had a couple copy-paste configurations there, but this is what the scaffolder can do for you. So this is the stage we're at this time, and we do plan to improve it. Another neat thing to note is if you go into the edit, you'll see we've got PrimeNG calendar control. So that supports in here. You can come in and change that and use that for the different objects. We have that for the daytime offset, for the time. The controls that are used, for example, for floating point, like this is the integer, but this is floating point. You'll see the details that are changeable there, and we support all the types that you'd expect to see. And if there's anything else that we need support for, feel free to bug it on us inside the repo, so that we can add it as an issue and then explore and see what we can do to enhance that. But hopefully this will help you be really productive in building apps that are your typical entity framework backed CRUD style apps in sections of the site that you want to be able to work with data very, very quickly and get it out to market. So if you have any feedback, let us know. In the meantime, good luck and good hunting.